How often have you felt maybe unfairly you have been charged for carrying luggage on board a flight? The European Parliament Transport Committee yesterday voted to ban airlines from charging passengers for carry-on bags up to 7 kilograms in weight. Travel and aviation journalist Eoghan Corry is our first guest. Tell us a little bit more about this, please, Eoghan.
Yeah, it's been in play for a little while. Good afternoon, Matt. There has been a lot of disquiet about charges by what sometimes referred to as stealth charges by airlines. They developed over the last 20 years. Ireland was one of the first in with it because of Ryanair. And the disquiet has led to quite a strong lobbying group by a consortium of the European consumer associations and a legal case in Spain, which led to the very large fine for a series of these airlines. You've got to remember, though, that this is still in play because the final decision will always go back to the Commission. The European Parliament will be getting representation over the next couple of months, but certainly the reaction in the initial, and there's many strands to this, but the reaction in the initial phases has been a strong counter-reaction by the airlines who say that people should be entitled to a cheaper fare, not to bring a bag on board. In fact, one of the aviation lobbyists said, "What are we going to look at next? You have to get a free popcorn when you go to the cinema." That's the approach of the airlines.
Okay, well, that's a rather facetious comparison to make. At present, what are you allowed? If, for example, is a woman allowed to carry on a handbag for free? Could a man or a woman bring on a small backpack if there maybe has something like a laptop in it without having to pay for that?
It was never defined, Matt. It started in America with the likes of Spirit Airlines and people like that bringing in charges for carry-on. What we saw in the initial stages of this was the move against checked-in baggage. If you were to go back 20 years or a little bit more now, 80% of people travelling out of Ireland checked a bag in. Now it's only 20%. The reason is that the first draft of charges came in for checked bags and you were allowed to carry on a larger bag free. The bag you're allowed to bring on free will depend on the aircraft type. If you're flying with Emerald Airlines with their turboprops, it's going to be smaller. Traditionally, the charter airlines only allowed about 4 or 5 kg, but Ryanair and Aer Lingus both for many years now have allowed 10 kg. What changed is Ryanair started charging for the 10 kg and then Aer Lingus immediately after. They didn't say they're charging for the bag, they say they're charging for priority boarding. Listeners will be very, very familiar. If you don't have priority boarding, all you're left with free of charge is a handbag or a laptop bag. But it was never defined in law. This is the first attempt to do so.
Stay with us all. I've got Kevin Hiney with us as well, who's the communications director for a group called Airlines for Europe. Kevin, just exactly what is Airlines for Europe?
Thanks for having me on, Matt. So Airlines for Europe, we're Europe's largest trade association for the airline industry. We have 17 airline groups representing about 80 to 85% of European traffic. And I suppose for Irish listeners, amongst our members, we have Ryanair. They were one of our founders, as well as IAG, which is the group which Aer Lingus are a member of.
Okay, so what's your response to what the European Parliament wants done?
I might just come back to something Eoghan brought up. He mentioned a Spanish case that is the instigator of all of this. And there's actually been an update in that in the higher courts in Spain have actually today ruled that the measures that were imposed by the Spanish Consumer Association, which made it mandatory to provide 1+1 bag, so that's the bag underneath the seat in front of you and the bag that goes up in the overhead locker, those measures have actually been stayed because they say they're unreasonable until the full appeals that some of the airlines have launched could be heard. And what I would say to all your listeners, all A3 measures members provide one piece of baggage that sits underneath the seat in front of you free of charge. And that's commonplace across Europe. I suppose for us, what we saw over the last couple of days, there was one vote in the European Parliament on this piece of baggage, but it's also the member states of the European Union a couple of weeks ago were also discussing baggage, and what they agreed to do was to standardise the dimensions of the piece of baggage that goes underneath the seat in front of you to provide a bit more clarity and more transparency. And from an A4E perspective, the members that I represent, we're actually going to work towards that agreement in terms of the standard dimensions for the piece of baggage that goes underneath the seat in front of you, and hope to be able to announce something in the next week or two about that standardisation.
Okay, but isn't this just a way for the airlines to make additional money? That they advertise a fare, they lure people in with the fare, and then they suddenly start throwing all sorts of extras on top when people have to carry bags with them when they're going on a flight?
Well, yes, I mean, Matt, we do provide at least one bag for people to take on board, as I said, that goes underneath the seat in front of you. But I think it's important to focus on what this is about, and it's about the choice for consumers. Offering this allows people to choose exactly what they want in terms of services, and ultimately to choose what they want to pay for. And we do know a lot of people choose to travel light. I'm a regular on the Dublin-Brussels route, and, I often go back to Ireland for the weekend, and there'll be days where I'll just choose to take my backpack, slot it underneath the seat in front of me. That's enough for that particular weekend. I'm going home for my mum's birthday in a couple of weeks, and I've chosen to pay for an extra bigger suitcase, going underneath a trolley bag going in the overhead because I need to bring home gifts and so on and so forth. And so that's what this is about. It's about choice and ensuring people get to pay exactly, what they want for the services they want. And, we know in actually a big market like Spain, about 30 to 40% of passengers choose to go light. That's about 50 million passengers choose just to go with the bag underneath the seat in front of them. They feel they don't need to pay extra. They're happy enough with that, and that's what suits them. And ultimately, from an airline perspective, that's what we want to do. We want to provide choice. We want to allow people to choose the offers and the services exactly what they want, and ultimately to pay only for the services that they want.
But hold on, have you plenty of space in the overhead lockers for taking lots of these bags?
Unfortunately, we don't. If you take a standard kind of airplane that you might go on a short haul route, it's about 180 passengers. There's actually only about 90 spaces for trolley bags in the overheads. So there isn't actually enough space for everyone to have a trolley bag. And I think, that's why this is about choice. Not everyone necessarily wants to have a trolley bag. And it's about offering those who value that and feel they need the extra space to give them the opportunity to choose that, as opposed to those who don't. And, from an operational point of view, if you try get, say, 180 people bringing on a trolley bag into a space that only fits about 90, I'm sure we've all had that experience where people are holding up the aisles, trying to get stuff in. There's not enough space. There's calls going out. From an organisational, operational point of view, there isn't actually just enough space to fit a cabin trolley bag in for everyone who may want one on the plane.
Eoghan Corry, would that be a fair argument, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. It is. It's an ongoing issue that there aren't the space for all the 10 kg bags. It's a big deal for Ryanair, as you well know, Matt. The Ryanair business model is turning around the aircraft. Ryanair aren't tremendously interested in the charge for the baggage. They're interested in the management of it, and not having to pay as much for baggage handling and that precious 25-minute turnaround. A Ryanair aircraft works very hard for a living, like Saturday's Child, takes off and lands 6 times. If you have 2 delays in the course of that with people with overhead baggage, it causes problems for the entire business model. We also, what will happen if this goes through, and I'm not sure it will in its current form. I'm absolutely certain, Matt, is that the extra charges that we pay now for priority boarding, as it's called in Ryanair, will be put on all the tickets. It will just mean that the lowest tier, the lowest price tier of tickets will be taken out of the inventory altogether, and I'm not sure that serves the consumer.
Eoghan Corry, travel and aviation journalist. Kevin Hiney, communications director of Airlines for Europe.